Citizens are voting on several ballot measures this election, one of which concerns election integrity.
8 states are voting on measures which would prohibit non-citizens from voting in elections. The states are Idaho, Iowa, Kentucky, Missouri, North Carolina, Oklahoma, South Carolina, and Wisconsin. Supporters of the measures say that they are merely trying to get ahead of an issue that hasn't begun yet in these states.
Opponents say that claims of large numbers of non-U.S. citizens are false and not based in facts. Jason Sneed from the Honest Elections Project explains why these measures have become more prevalent in recent years.
I think what you're seeing this election is a strong push in states across the country to affirmatively say once and for all that only American citizens should be voting in our elections. Now, that's a pretty common sense sort of issue. In fact, we've seen polling that nearly 90% of the public agrees that only citizens should be voting in our elections. But nevertheless, unfortunately, there are a lot of state constitutions that have language that groups on the left have shown they're willing to exploit to push non-citizen into local issues and begin to normalize this. So that's necessitated a push to amend state constitutions to defend voting rights for American citizens. And that's why you're seeing measures in states across the country to lock this in.
All right, Geoff Pallay with Ballotpedia joins us now. So, Geoff, how do you think these ballot measures will perform, and what are you hearing already, at least in South Carolina and North Carolina and Oklahoma, were called as passing, meaning they have restricted the right to vote to citizens only?
Yeah, good evening, Tracy. Thanks for having me. So the early votes are that most of these measures are passing, and by pretty wide margins. Here in South Carolina, the results show that it currently is leading with 85% from 2018 to 2022, six states passed these kinds of ballot measures, and usually by pretty wide margins. When state legislatures are putting these on the ballot, they're very often being put on the ballot by bipartisan votes from the state legislature. So you also see very little campaign spending in these ballot measures, which is an indication that both sides, support and opposition, don't really see a need to spend very much for their side. So, early indications are most likely that most of these ballot measures will pass tonight.
Yeah, and additional ballot measures include the important issue of school choice.
That's right, Geoff. According to edchoice.org, school choice allows public education funds to follow students to schools or services that best fit their needs. 3 states are voting on measures surrounding education and school choice. First, Colorado, Amendment 80 would provide that each student in grades K through 12 has the right to school choice.
Yeah, and Kentucky, Amendment 2 would allow the General Assembly to, quote, provide financial support for the education of students outside the system of common schools.
And on the other side, Nebraska Referendum 435 would repeal legislation allocating $10 million every year for a scholarship program to cover costs for eligible students to attend private schools. Leslie Heiner from EdChoice explains how school choice ballot initiatives have historically performed.
Ballot initiatives involving any kind of school choice measure are normally result in dismal outcomes for the educational freedom movement. There's a simple reason for that. I think when people who want educational freedom look at a ballot initiative, they're looking at it from a policy perspective for bringing freedom into their state, empowering parents, etc. However, the opposition is always led by the national teachers unions, both the NEA and the AFT, and the money that they put into killing any kind of school choice initiative, first of all, is huge.
Now, Geoff, Kentucky called this ballot measure rejecting school choice this evening, limiting the ability of parents to have their money follow their child to private schools and private religious schools. Are you seeing any other results?
Yeah, so the early votes coming out of Colorado are that the no side is currently winning with 54% of the vote. And in Nebraska, the referendum 435, the no side currently has 62%. So both those states are pretty early in the vote counting at about 9:30 Eastern this evening. But in Kentucky, that was a 65-35 win for the no side, defeating that measure.
Yeah, and 2 states have measures that are centered around drug legalization.
Well, in Florida, Amendment 3 would legalize recreational marijuana for adults 21 and older, while in Massachusetts, ballot question 4 would create a Natural Psychedelic Substances Commission and Advisory Board and allow individuals 21 years of age or older to grow, possess, and use a personal amount of psychedelic substances. EWTN recently spoke with Father Tad of the Catholic Bioethics Center about these measures.
The game plan is very similar to what happened with marijuana, and it expanded with a speed and rapidity that was rather breathtaking. So I think that it's important early on here at the very cusp of this to call people back to some reflection and to make sensible choices around this. These substances really belong in the clinic with appropriate supervision by medical professionals. And should not be allowed in a completely unregulated environment out in the open.
Now, Geoff, these sorts of measures have become more and more prevalent. Why do you think that is, and what results are you starting to see?
Yeah, so far the Massachusetts question 4 is at this juncture in the evening, 47% yes, 53% no. These ballot measures they're often pretty well funded, especially the marijuana one in Florida. That was the most expensive marijuana measure in history. And really 11 states, this is important to note with Florida's amendment, so 11 states require some kind of supermajority to pass a ballot measure. And this year what we saw was, say, with Florida Amendment 1, 3, and 4 is that they received more than 50%, but fewer than 60%, which is what was needed. Since 2006, which is when the supermajority was created, there have been 9 prior amendments that have fallen under a sort of similar fate where they received more than 50%, but less than the required 60%. So, like with many other initiatives, we see these marijuana or medicinal psychedelic drug measures where there's an interest behind it. We've seen some out in Portland, for instance, as well. So usually the ballot measure is an opportunity for sides to test out their campaigns and the results and dictate what's to come in future years ahead.
Yeah, and the measure in Florida, that was rejected, continuing to restrict marijuana use.
That's
Geoff,
right.
What does that tell you about Florida and also other states that are considering legalizing drugs?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in this case, it tells us that they weren't able to reach the threshold. Most of the marijuana measures have passed over the years. Many states already legalize it either for recreational use or for medicinal use. So it'll be interesting to see what's to come, because it was, like I said earlier, a very expensive ballot measure campaign. One of the measures that contributed to the more than $1 billion that have been spent in ballot measure campaigns this cycle.
Well, we're going to leave it right there. Geoff, thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate it, and we look forward to having you tomorrow morning to help us parse out the results from the rest of the evening.
Thank you.